Welcome. It is an incredible pleasure to have you all here on site at CAM. My name is Lisa Melandri. I'm Executive Director here at the museum. And again, it is not only wonderful to be here, it is wonderful to have one of our exhibiting artists here, Kathy Butterly, to share her insights with you. This exhibition has been one of my great pleasures and privileges to organize. I have long been enthralled by Kathy's work, and I think when I say, as you will see, its complexity and its richness, all in a small package, I have talked about, and Kathy has talked about, the fact that these little sculptures are personalities, they are characters, but they are also tiny universes, and they really can pull you in, and they ask you to stop and look and to stay a while. So you will find not only extraordinary shapes and glazes and colors, but in some cases, for example, those tiny, tiny carved beads, there are moments of almost insanity in them. So I invite you to really, really come and look and stay a while, indeed. So this show would never have been possible without the support of many, many individuals. Certainly the lenders from across the United States who have shared their pieces with us, and the many people who supported the show. David Cherrick II, Girlfriend Fund, Ted Rowland, Anonymous, Carrie Shapiro and Peter Frey, Elizabeth Levine, and the Maxine and Stuart Frankel Charitable Foundation. In addition, I would like to offer my special thanks to James Cohen Gallery and to Emily Rotolo for all of their assistance and support in bringing this together, particularly with regard to those far-flung loans across the United States. The show, as Kathy will talk to you about, is in two distinct parts. And that has been sort of wonderful. We have them bookending the museum. In the front is an exhibition of cup forms, and that is called Out of One, Many. And here, right along this side in this gallery, is the exhibition called Headscapes. Now, I thank Kathy so much. It has been not only a pleasure to work with her and a great deal of fun to learn more and more about these works, but we are really, really grateful to her because she made 10 brand new pieces to premiere here at CAM. And given, indeed, the labor, the complexity of these pieces, that's a pretty astounding and amazing feat. So we are really, truly delighted with that. So some notes on Kathy. She received her BFA at Moore College of Art and Design and an MFA at University of California, Davis, where she studied with the ceramic artist Robert Arneson. In 2019, she went back to her alma mater for a sort of retrospective of her work at the Jan Schrem and Maria Minetti Schrem Museum of Art at UC Davis. She has exhibited widely in the US and internationally, and her works are in the permanent collections of institutions including the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Australia, Brooklyn Museum of Art, Carnegie Museum of Art, Pittsburgh, Detroit Institute of Arts, Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Met, Portland Museum of Art in Portland, Maine, and the DeYoung Museum, San Francisco, among many, many others. In addition, she has been the recipient of numerous awards and grants, including a Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation grant, a Guggenheim Fellowship Award, a Smithsonian American Art Museum's Contemporary Artist Award, a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, and a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant. She lives and works in New York. It is our great pleasure to welcome her and to hear from her about the work and to gain even more insight into all of them, into these wonderful universes and personalities. Kathy, please.
I'm going to take my mask off so you can actually hear me and I can get through the talk because wearing a mask projecting is a little difficult. Thank you for coming, and thank you for having a show with me at this fantastic museum. Lisa gave a lot of really important information about me, so I don't feel like I need to go that much into what I've done. But I will give you a little bit of background about where and how my work started, and then we'll go into specifically the works in this show. So I've been doing this, I mean, honestly, I've been working with clay for over 40 years, but like professionally, I don't know, air quotes really, because it's a passion, it's what I do. That's been 35 years, which is hard to say, but it's great. So I'm going to start here. I did go to Moore College of Art in Philadelphia for my undergraduate degree. And when I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, and I didn't know what art was really. Like, I didn't have a mentor. I didn't know what it was to be an artist. So I first went to Moore thinking I was going to be an interior designer, because I thought you had to have a 9-to-5 job. But I was creative, so that seemed to, be where I was going to go. So when I went to Moore, I saw all these people making art, and I'm like, I'm allowed to do that? So I decided, no, I'm going into, at first I thought I was going to go into painting. And then it didn't feel right, jumped around to welding, jumped around to a few other things. But it was while I was at Moore College of Art, I took a class of ceramics, and I actually hated it because everything I made was really ugly, and I really thought that working with clay was utilitarian and only for making decorative work and didn't have any meaning to it. I was young. But it took Viola Fry. She came to Moore College of Art, and it was after she had a one-woman show at the Whitney Museum of Art. She came to Moore, gave a lecture, gave a demonstration, and she changed my life in an instant. I mean, it was literally like the light bulb going off over my head. And for me, what it was that union. Like, I feel like working with clay, or at least the way that I like to work with clay, is that link between painting and sculpture. I need to work with color, and I need to be very painterly with my work, but I also need to work three-dimensionally. So Viola, this is an example of her work, it's not my work. Viola combined sculpture and painting, but then more importantly, there was meaning in her work, and that's what I craved, meaning in my work. So, Mary Judge, you might remember stuff like this. This is the work I made for my senior thesis at Moore College of Art. So these pieces are about 4 feet tall, and for me, when I look at it, I know what I was thinking about. It was I was obsessed with Marston Hartley's paintings, and so I would just carve. And also, I was like a little punk rocker, so I was like, getting all radical on the carvings. But I was working stream of consciousness and just drawing images on the works. And then I was making my own glazes so they wouldn't be shiny, because I wanted them to look more like oil paint. I still had this little chip on my shoulder. So I graduated from Moore College of Art in 1986. I was 96. 86, and I didn't go to graduate school right away. I knew I wanted to go to graduate school because I really just got that little bite of what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and I knew I had to learn more. But I also was in school my entire life, so I took 2 years off, and not off, I waitressed, I did like really a lot of grunt work jobs, but I also traveled to Southeast Asia and backpacked for a few months, and that was really important to my development as a person. And then I went to UC Davis for 2 years, where I did study like with some amazing artists. But what happened also when I was at UC Davis was right when I got to, see, I always get shaky about this, even still, it's been so many years. Right when I went to Davis, 3 days later, my boyfriend of 5.5 years killed himself. So I entered doing these very large sculptural pieces, all carved on the outside, and then I made this piece. And this very tiny little piece. And it's called Wounded Pitcher. And it's about 7 inches tall, and I felt like the other pieces, the larger pieces with the carvings, they were illustrating. And my heart was just ripped apart and broken. So I felt like I went into those vessels and I pulled out the heart and I started working small because it felt right and it felt heartfelt. And that's how I started, working very small. But what I realized was like, small is so much more powerful. It's so much more to the point. So at this point, I choose to work small because I feel that it's very intimate. And I think intimacy has a lot of power. That's maybe not, it's not something you see that much, small works that have power, but I feel like with this material, I can speak loudly. This is called Taste, and this is from my graduate exhibition at UC Davis. So I love working with the vessel form. Like, it's a way that, especially with the cup forms, which you'll see in Gallery A, they're very self-referential, and they're very they're psychological self-portraits. That's how I like to describe them. But so I think you can start seeing, like in this work called Taste, which is around 9 inches tall. It's this vessel tasting its handle. But I felt like I could say everything I need to say within the vessel form. So for me, I still work with the vessel form, whether it be a cup or a vase form. But for me, that's my blank canvas. And my canvas, I like starting with a ready-made. I don't want to invest in the initial form. So I don't want to become precious at the beginning. Precious happens as I develop and fall in love with what I'm working on. But I feel like I don't know why I need to use a vessel. It's just everything for me. So anyway, the next slide is, I always say Morandi, but it's Mondrian. So I want to show you a little bit of how I'm looking at art now. Like, I live in New York City. I go to museums all the time, or will again. But this painting is Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie. And I think most people are familiar. I couldn't get a picture because of copyright. But so anyway, this is a picture I took on my iPhone. And from far away, that painting looks really hard-edged and slightly cold, fun but cold. And it's we know that painting so much. I mean, we see purses like that too, right? And I went to the museum one day. I mean, I walk past this painting all the time. I looked at it, and it just, like, I went really close, and I think the guards were, like, really worried. I was there for about 20 minutes just looking and taking close-up pictures because it's so passionate. It's so intimate. The way those brush strokes, I mean, you look at what he was thinking. You look at the weight of the color, directionality of his brush stroke, how the edges are not perfect. And so this painting that we think is so perfect has so much human qualities within it. And so that's what I'm after. Like, I think there's such power when you can be really intimate with something. So I was in grad school in California for 2 years, and then I lived there like a year and a half after, drove cross-country in my pickup truck, and then arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, where I had a studio where I lived, which it was really extremely rough. But this piece was made in New Jersey after I drove cross-country, and I switched my clay up a little bit. So at UC Davis, I was using a very kind of brutal, rough sculpture clay. I decided that, and they were also made by coils, which is like, rolling little worms and snakes and putting it together. When I arrived in New Jersey, I realized I was really interested in this very traditional vessel form, and I kept making the same form over and over again. And I thought, well, when you make something with your hands, you get invested in it, and it becomes very precious. And I didn't want to be precious. I just want to make a form and then manipulate it. So I was like, well, just make a mold and cast Forms. So I did, and I thought it would save me a lot of time, like, oh, I'm just going to start making a lot more work now. No, because I love porcelain so much. It's extremely non-forgiving, and I like that about it. It's tough, it's got a personality to it, but what I found is that the thinner you go with porcelain, the thinner you carve it, the thinner you smooth it, it becomes translucent and can glow and feels very alive. So, so I thought, yeah, I'm gonna cast things, it's gonna go quicker. It actually started taking longer because I really became intimate with this material. And I think that's been something that I'm recognizing right now as I'm talking, is that I have love affairs with my materials. I build up a relationship like the porcelain, and it's an intimate process making the work, and I really do fall in love, have love affairs with each of my pieces. So, and it's the same thing with glazing. Over the years, I've been working with glaze for so long, and I love color so much that each glaze color and I have over 6,000 jars of, yeah, I have a problem with, sorry, we don't have a new car, I need a new glaze, family. But I just, each color has a relationship and a meaning to me. Like, when I'm working on my pieces, color has meaning to me. So anyway, I'm gonna move on. Oh, the other thing about the way I work, I guess I can talk about it in the next slide. This is a piece, I'm forgetting the title, sorry. But so my husband Tom is a painter. I moved out of my studio in New Jersey, and my husband and I got married, and we moved to a loft in the East Village where we both live and work now. When we first got to the loft, there was no heat, and I think we got our heat like on Christmas Day. Like, we were freezing. It was a big open loft, and it wasn't made for living. And so I made this piece. So the initial form is that it's a casting like the same piece you saw before. So the main part of the porcelain is the pink part. And then I did this thing where I think by limiting I know this, by limiting my materials, I have to, and limiting myself to like a vessel form, it's actually like not limiting it all to me. It actually, I have to be pushing myself and being creative with my materials more and more. And so I develop new techniques along the way, like whatever needs to be done, I'll figure out how to, as an artist, we're problem solvers. So, there's a problem, how do I fix it? So with this piece, I was so cold, like, when I looked at it, the piece was pink and it looked really naked. And I started to knit a sweater over the piece with clay. So if you look under the black rim, you'll see that it looks like a cable knit sweater. And I did that over the entire piece. It took me 9 months to carve that. And it was a drag. But I was learning and I was loving it. Because I built it up with clay, and then I carved it so that it looked like it was really knit. And then I got to the end of doing that. I worked on other pieces too at the same time because you can go crazy. So I finished it, I glazed it, I fired it, and I thought it looked so stupid. I'm like, oh my God, you just spent like 9 months doing that. But another thing that I love is I love making something and working really hard, and it's extreme power to be able to say that's bad and cover something that you worked on for so long. So it's kind of a power trip that I have with myself, like, oh, all right, I have to cover it, and the works in the show, in the Headscapes, like, there's a lot of covering up going on in that body of work. But this is where it kind of happened. Like, so basically I just covered the cable knit sweater with like a really thick, beautiful blue, and then I put more stuff on it, and then it felt right. So I have 2 children, and this is jumping ahead a little bit. This is a cup form, so this is from the same pint glass shape that Gallery A is made of. But this goes to the problem solving thing too. So I actually made this was when I was pregnant. So the vessel part, which is that main pink naked area, I realized I have no intentions. I don't know what I'm making before I make it. I just work intuitively. The colors become, go on intuitively. And then I realized later what they're about. Like even the show in there, I'm still trying to figure it out, the new pieces. It's coming. But I didn't know I was making pregnancy pieces, but I was. It's pretty clear that all the action's going on in the belly. But when I made this, I was like, oh, I really need something on the top of it. But I don't want it solid. I need something airy. Like, how do you do that? I guess I should go into now the multiple firing thing. So the thing. So the technique that I've developed over these years. The multiple firings have to do with when you make something out of clay, typically you make the thing out of clay, you put it in the kiln and you cook it. So it's hard enough that you can put glaze on it without it crumbling apart. So you have your first bisque firing, then you do your glaze firing, and then you take it out of the kiln, you're done. You have a color on it. And that didn't make sense to me, because coming from like understanding a painting background, like I don't know anybody, my husband's a painter, I don't know anybody who just puts paint on once and then they're done. So why would you do that with clay? So I started adding color, and the thing about glaze is you could put a color, like out of the jar, you put on a glaze, it looks blue, but it fires clear. Or you could put it on red and it fires green. So what you put on isn't what you're gonna see. And it's really chemistry. So as the pieces go into the kiln up to 1800 degrees, they're mixing and changing. And over the years, I kind of know what to expect, but I'm always really wanting a screw up in the kiln so that it takes me into a new direction that I hadn't imagined. Back to this piece. How to resolve, I need space on top. Those are thousands of little dots of clay that go from one side, that go up and meet in the center. And then I did that all the way around. And so I call this crocheting. I don't know why, but it was terrifying to me, because another thing I should explain to people who haven't worked with clay is that you make something out of clay, it's wet, it dries, it shrinks. And then you put it in the kiln, it shrinks again. And then you put glaze on it, and it doesn't shrink anymore. But with this, I was putting clay on a piece that hadn't been fired before. Like the piece had been fired, but the clay hadn't been fired, so it was gonna crack. And I could have ruined the piece that I spent a lot of time on. But I was like, well, it's not done until I resolve this issue. So I guess what I'm saying is there's risk involved. Oh, I've never done this before, but I'm gonna just show you some of my tools. So my process of building, like I said, it's slip casting. I'll just talk. So basically, I find a form that I like. All the forms, is that over? Or are you just gonna keep watching the same thing over and over again? Okay. All the forms in Gallery A are from a pint glass. So I go to the store, I find a form that I like, I make a plaster mold of it, 2 sides. Plaster absorbs water. So basically I take liquid clay, pour it into the void, wait until it feels thick enough for me, pour out the liquid clay, and then I have a skin. So that's my blank canvas. So what you saw right there was after I take it out of the mold, I manipulate the form. But then this is really probably my favorite part of working, is I carve the piece really, really thin, and this is where I get the gestures in the clay. So they start off really hideously ugly, and then I take razor blades and dental tools and pins and whatever and carve them until they look right and feel right. These are just some of my glazes. This is a few years ago. My husband gave me his wood shop, so we knocked down a wall, and I have probably double these amount of glazes in my studio. Oh, you don't see it. There you go. That's just some of them. Yeah. And this is, so I buy them and then I have to test them. So I make little test chips of the glazes. So I can pull out, like, there's so many different variations of orange, and there's like opacity issues, there's fluidity things that I have to think about with the glazes. So I just have little samples so I can bring it over to the piece I'm working on and imagine what it's going to look like. Okay, now we're getting into Gallery A. For some reason, I have no idea why, but I wanted to make sculptural cup forms. And I mean, there's a tradition in contemporary art, like ceramic art, of cups as sculptural forms. Ron Nagel and Ken Price are the people that I'm thinking of. And I wanted to do that too. But I can't tell myself to do something. It has to feel right. And so I had it in the back of my mind, I want to work on sculptural cups, but it just never felt right. One day, my husband came home from Yale after seeing an exhibition on Mayan ceramics, and he brought back a book of Mayan cup forms. And for some reason, then all of a sudden, I had permission to make forms. So this is the first cup form that I made in 1996, and this one's called Spring. And I was noticing, it took me 25 years to realize, or no, more than that, like, I think these were like fertility pieces, actually, looking back, because it was when I just married my husband. This is called Like Butter, and this is when my husband and I moved to the loft that we're in now in the East Village, and I didn't realize how provocative this piece was at the time when I made it, but this is what I was feeling, and it felt right. And I don't try to filter anything. I just make what feels right, and I feel like I'm not in charge. I'm in charge, and I'm not in charge. Like, I feel like I'm my work's enabler. I help it get to where it wants to be, and then we come to some sort of agreement at some point. Like, yeah, this is. It's kind of like my kids. Like, my kids, I have two kids. They come from the same place, and yet they have such unique personalities. I try to bring out the personality of the piece. This is a piece that's called "I'm Not Sure I Trust Your Eggs." And it's from a show that I had in New York City. The title of the show was Pantyhose and Mirandy. And very occasionally, I'll give myself an assignment. And the assignment was, I had gone to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and saw years ago there was a Mirandy painting show. And I love his still lives. And I was really struck by how he made colors that I thought were awful, like really interesting, like beige, taupe, mauve. All the words, they just even sound bad. But I thought they were really boring, because clearly I like bright colors. But I challenged myself to use his palette. So that's where the title of the show comes from. So I was making these forms and using a limited palette, and it was probably the most important body of work I ever made in my life, because I learned so much. What I learned was that for me, color is much more interesting when there's nuance. So not just like using all like primary bright colors, like mix in some grays and some taupes, or whatever you need to do. The other thing I realized was, like, I have to use bright colors too. Like, I just can't stick to like neutrals. Probably the most important thing I learned from this body of work was, like, in this piece in particular, I became really aware about the quality of a line. Like, what can line do to enhance a piece or to work with a piece? And with these larger works, which are in Gallery C, I think understanding line really helped me go from smaller forms to larger forms, because it has to do more with the gesture. Anyway, getting to this piece, what I realized was that my first line of interest is the outline of the form. So it's not a drawn line, it's the sculpted line. And so I felt like what I was doing was making three-dimensional line drawings. The other thing I became aware of in terms of line was, just the carved line within the piece had to be like as interesting as the drawn line within the piece. So in this piece, there's the outline of the piece, the carved lines, and the drawn lines, and the painted lines. I just became aware of the importance, the quality of a line. This is a piece called Mushroom Nirvana, which is what I did after the Morandi show, because I was like, I really need to do some bright colors. What I learned in this piece was about volume. So this piece, when you go look at it in Gallery A, I made the form and I'm glazing it, and it's getting all interesting on me, and it was lacking something. So I started adding this really thick blue glaze. And I would do multiple firings and just keep adding more and more of this blue glaze. And I realized like the blue is starting to take on form, like color. I'm using just pure color to build up form. And then the volume of the blue sort of became the protagonist or the antagonist in the piece. So it was like this color started taking on a really grand personality. And that really interests me, that color can become form, can be something that is a personality within a piece. This piece is called November 9th, and the story behind this piece is the date of completion, the year was 2017, but the date, sorry, I'm correcting you. The date on the wall is 2017, because that's when I completed the piece. But the title was chosen November 9th, 2016, and that's the day after Hillary Clinton lost the election, and I was a wreck. This piece was painted bright colors on November 8th, and then on November 9th, I covered the whole thing in black, except for the pink on the arms and the power pearls. So, yeah. And then even on the inside has some black on the inside. And a friend of mine, it was Janelle Porter, said, oh, it's like the Morrissey song, I'm black on the inside, so that's why I wear black on the outside, because that's how I was feeling. This piece is called Scout and is also in the front room. And I'm getting to a side that you really don't get to see. So what interested me here is I really also was I was aware of it, but for some reason this piece was really interesting to me, where I felt like I was experimenting more with color and like color blocking, and this color's not all over the place, and using textures like a very, very dry acidic yellow next to a glittery orange, like really thinking about the contrast in terms of like the glaze quality, and a really pretty awful color next to a beautiful color. So I'm really interested in like contrast in terms of the meaning within my work, but also the textures, the colors. Like I think putting opposites in a piece and in terms of their meaning too I think every artist kind of works for that, but looks for it in their work. But I really like contrasts and contradictions. This is called Loud Silence, and this piece also interests me because it's actually very restrained, and I have a really hard time not doing a lot of work on my pieces. So I also like that it's an open and closed mouth. It's screaming, but it also can't scream. This is called Tangsum, and it's also in the exhibition. for me, this piece is, the way that the brown glaze works on the form, it's like color and form become one to me. Like it's such a luscious glaze, and really, I think that's what allows the piece to feel so fluid. But another thing I want you to notice is that these last few pieces were all flat. They don't allow, and it's like, no, you're not, there's nothing to use here, they're closed. This is called Fixer, which was made in 2018, and I kind of know what it's about now. So it had to do with, we're getting towards some of the last pint glass forms that I've ever made. This is like a really naked piece. Like I kind of went back to being like naked and fleshy, and then these green frame, like wood-like things, these lines are starting to build a new layer on them. So for me, it was kind of like time to rebuild, time to be green. Ladies, we're doing it. Me being like, this is referential to me being naked and just feeling like, all right, I gotta do something. This is what I consider a headscape to be. So headscape for me, it's about my mind, my brain, my head. One of my favorite things to look at when I go to museums is actually Renaissance portrait bust paintings. So I like the idea of the bust, the head, but it also has to do very much with the planet, with Earth. So it's kind of like brainscapes in a way. I'm like everybody, I imagine, really worried about the environment, and so I think that's also why there's been the shift in my scale of works. I've been getting, they're up to a whopping 12 inches now, which is volumetrically very large for me. But I think it's because I'm really concerning myself with issues that are grander and larger than just me and my body, and has to do with global issues. So this piece is called Zones. This is called Super Bloom, which is in the exhibition here. I've never done this before. I'm showing you a few early in-process shots. I looked on my iPhone and found a few pictures. So it starts off, this is probably after a few firings. There's this pink line, and then yellow, and then I change it to adding this bright orange on the top with a whitewash over the pink, and you can see there's another like line that I developed and built, which then I covered with a green. This probably, I think I built up a lot more color underneath, because when you look at the piece, there's a lot of chunky glaze there. But I have realized lately that I really trust being lost. I really trust my process of being completely lost within a piece, and I trust that I'm going to figure it out and concoct something to make it work and speak for me. So I'm lost. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what colors. I don't know what the mood of the piece wants to be. So it's not exactly lost. I'm finding something. I'm trying to find something that has meaning through color and form, because it had no meaning before. And then it became Super Bloom. Here you'll notice here, there's no base on it. This one, I decided to put this really complicated base on it. And I think there's another thing to know about me, which you probably realize. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do the longest way possible and the most painful way to make something. So, but that's another thing, is I just want to make work that needs to be here. I do throw a few pieces out, but I make about 14 pieces a year, and I work pretty much every day. And that's because I love doing what I do. But I don't want to make a lot of work. I want to make really good work that feels really good to me. This is the piece completed. This is another piece that's in the show. This is called Core. And I know the pink part that you see on the top, that's after the second firing. So that's after the first glaze firing. And then I thought I was going to put it on a pink base and just make, I was trying to be monochromatic with this piece. Then I decided, oh yeah, I'm going to try this red base, and then I'm going to paint some orange. I'm going to try to connect the handle with the base. Well, I didn't do it. And then I know I painted the whole thing yellow, and then I put red on it, and it looked like a circus. And then I did this. I painted orange on it, and then the blue is not fired yet, but I'm like, all right, I'm just really going to screw this piece up and see where it takes me. And it took me here. And so here you can see, oh, I spent like 2 weeks carving red beads on the piece, which is at the top. And then I added gray, and I added yellow. And then I got rid of that other base and made an orange base and added texture. And then this is what the piece ended up looking like in the end. So this is called Black and White and Red and Blue. And I've never made a black piece before. I've always used brights and whites, and I decided I want to try to really do more monochromatic work. I took this piece out of the kiln after the first glaze firing, and I was struck by its beauty. It's like, for me, like, I'm like, that's beautiful. And then I put it on my shelf, and I couldn't touch it for over 2 months. I was like, it's so beautiful. Like, I can't do anything to it. What do I do with it? And then I decided, yeah, this piece is going to be about the color black, but I need color to speak about the color black. So on the base, on the platform, the cube, the podium, as I like to say, it's actually a red, and then, it's actually a very dark blue, that underpainting, and then I put a really deep red on it and fired it a few times. So red plus blue reads as a black. And then I added these, they're actually a very dark blue lines down the side, and then I added a little bit of white on the handle, as you can see. But there you can see. I didn't intend on making a piece called Black and White and Red and Blue, but the piece took me there. And as I was working on it, it just made sense to speak about the times that we're in, which are, racially, like, Black Lives Matter, and that I wanted to speak about just the destruction and the fires that are going on. Like, who knew there was so much, like, in the works, but really thinking about the wildfires that are going on around the world. So color has meaning to me. So this piece is called Yellow Build, and it really changed for me. When I was in New York City so I work in New York City most of the year, and then I go to Maine in the summer. So I brought this piece half finished from New York up to Maine. And when I brought it up to Maine and I started to relax, it became a totally different piece to me. It became very optimistic about going forward and building. And I was looking at flowers and bees and honey and deliciousness, and before the color yellow seemed kind of sad to me, but when I was in Maine, I was like, this is about starting and building again. So it's kind of yellow, trying to uplift and start something new. This is another piece that's in the show. Now I have to look up my titles. It's called Offshore. So I'm giving you another example of what a piece goes through a little bit. So this is what it looks like after about 4 or 5 firings. That's another, like, I was like, where am I with this piece? Then we get to this. And I did, when I was looking up close at the slides, I saw, well, there's carved beads in there, and there's some lines in there. So I just went ahead and had to save the piece, basically. Then this is how it ended up. I told you the wrong title of that last piece. That's called Crossed Arms. This is called Offshore. So the quick thing that I want to say about this piece is that on the bottom of the handles, these loopy things that you see when you go into the gallery, that's just glaze. It's many, many firings of just, what I wanted was for these handles to be holding things off the main shore, off the main body, and I wanted them to feel psychically weighted. So my materials are clay and glaze, so I use glaze to create weight, and I fired them over and over and over again with glaze until it felt really weighty, and it looked stupid. So I carved beads around the handles, so that's the red, white, and blue part. And then that looked stupid, so I covered it with more glaze and then added an orange line over it. So it finally felt right to me. But for me, I wanted to create a place that was closing off at the top and holding things off to the side. So there's the content right there. This piece is called Active Start. And once again, kind of like that yellow piece, it's like a new beginning. It's like Phoenix Rising type of thing. This is called Pause. And I was working on the piece, and I thought it was beautiful, like this very satiny, beautiful, whitish pink on the main body. And at the same time, I started making the base, the podium for it. And I started to get these vibrational colors I was building up and doing with multiple firings, and it got to this point where it looked like, you know, when you cut open a blueberry, you get that weird color of, you don't know if it's white or blue or pink. Like, anyway, it felt like that to me. I'm like, that's really cool. I love that color. And then it started to remind me of when you get static on a TV or on a computer screen, like, you know, just like you can't watch that program anymore. You're on hold. And then I made this piece during lockdown in New York City. So like we were on pause. And this piece, the way that I glazed it with the blue, it felt very fluid, kind of like a watercolor painting of water. And it felt very fluid. But then with the colors and the dots of glaze, it felt like a pause to me. So that's why it's called Pause, because we were on pause. This is called Super Green, yeah. So for me, I'm trying to use color in a way that speaks about the form boldly and intimately, and layer them pretty thick so they feel like an object unto themselves. So I'm trying to go, I think, a little bit more simple, but speak as loudly and as interestingly as when I have a lot of things on the piece, a lot of details. So anyway, now we go back to this piece, which I started off with. And of course, I'm forgetting, sorry, I'm getting tired. Anyway, this piece for me was, so it was so interesting because I realized something that really interests me is that the form never changes. So it's color that changes the form. So the works that were made for Headscapes, there's a small, medium, and large size in there. Most of the new work that I made for Cam is from a fishbowl shape, and they start off kind of. I didn't alter that shape so much. So the black and white and red and blue, that's the same casting as this one, the same form. What I learned And what I'm interested in is now I want to make a form, but I want, knowing form never changes really. It's the painting, it's the addition of color that changes the form. So like how radically different can I make these forms by color and gesture and where I apply color? So that's what I'm interested in right now, is trying to simplify form but speak loudly about form through color. So that's it. Oh, good. Question?
Hi. You talked about getting permission to make a piece.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important to have permission?
Permission from myself? I can't remember what I said. Permission from myself? Oh.
You need the permission to do it.
I know what you're talking about. I was talking about I needed permission to start making cup forms. So I think it's the whole thing of I have a really hard time with assignments. Like I'm really good, like, you know, if Lisa said, Kathy, I need this, I'll do it. But to give myself an assignment or for somebody to give, like I don't do commissions. Then it becomes a job, then it becomes work to me. So permission is, I think permission is understanding, like being ready, knowing somehow that it's the right moment for me to move on with this idea, with this feeling. So I can't just make something. Like I don't make things. I don't want to make things. I want to learn, and I want to find, and I want to experience, and I want to fall in love, and I want to have fights. You know, these pieces, there are times when we are not getting along, and that's why you should work on a lot at one time. So, but I think it's permission. Permission is understanding. Like for me, it's like, I understand what I need to do now. I don't know what they're going to look like, but the door was opened for me to move on.
Hi. So your work seems to be a lot about spontaneity, and it talks about the material of clay and glaze. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, when you start a new piece, how much of that idea is already formed, and how much of it is you responding to the clay as you start manipulating and pushing and pulling on that?
So manipulating, pushing, pulling, that's what it's all about. So the only thing I know is, all right, if I'm going to work on a pint glass, I know it's going to end up being about 3 inches tall unless I add some big handles or something. So I know that I have a limitation, and it really, the way that I work is really like a Rorschach test. They honestly are three-dimensional Rorschachs at the beginning. So I push, prod, carve, do whatever until I see something in it, and I'm like, that reminds me of this fold, and that's my in. If I take the piece out of the mold and start manipulating it, and I'm not feeling it, it just goes into the recycle bucket, and I make a new piece out of it eventually. And what was the second part? Did I answer it? Okay, good.
Multiple firings. If there's one area you want to keep, or a few areas you want to keep, and then there are others you want to change, add more glaze to, do the other ones stay the same? Don't they change when you glaze it again, the places that you wanted to keep?
Yeah, everything changes,
Oh,
but not
okay.
drastically. Like,
Okay.
depending on the glaze. I know that, I know my materials. So I know that, and iPhones are really handy to take pictures in process. Like if you have a color you know you want to go back to yellow, like I'll remember in the last firing to go back to yellow. But things change, and I welcome that. And so with some of the pieces, like when you look at Just for Men in the first room, that pink glaze that's on the form, it started off shiny. and it aged, and it aged, and it aged, and it it got wrinkles, and I like that. So I allow the quality of what the glaze does during the firing to happen or not happen. So if I see the wrinkles happening and I don't want it, I'll just say, all right, Kath, you're going to give it a facelift later, and you're just going to add a new layer of glaze and pop it back. So I do lose things, and things move. Like sometimes I'll do like a big strand of pearls around something, and then it depends what glaze I'm adding. I now know, like, if I add a lot of glaze near that necklace on one side of the piece, that necklace is going to start pulling down. So I just have to, like, in the old days, I would have forced it back up. And now I like it, because I like that it's taking me to a place that I really didn't know I was going to go. And so maybe the piece has more more emotion. If it's not if it's perfect, it's this way. If it's like this, then it's kind of telling the story of how I'm feeling right now. Which now, at least I'm feeling like super, like yellow build. I'm like, it's, things are going up and getting golden and yellow, and yeah. You know what I'm talking about, so yeah.
With that, I would like to thank Kathy
Okay.
so much for being here with us and her presentation, her work.
Thank you, everybody.